Hi guys, and welcome to the Cardiovascular System lecture. We're going to get started. We are in Unit 5, the Cardiovascular System in Schoology. So if you click on that, I'll show you where stuff is at so you can access it yourself. So once you're in Unit 5, we are in Module 11 here. If you click on that, so in here, we are going to watch the overview of the circulatory system. It kind of goes through blood flow through the heart and the blood cells and stuff. Here is the PowerPoint we're going to be working through, and here is a copy of the lecture notes in case you don't have them printed out. They are right here for you to view. And then we're also going to go over the compare and contrast matrix that's right down here. So those are the things we're going to go over. So why don't we get started? Let's look at the notes really quick. So here are our notes. They start out, as always, with terms to know. So most of these terms do relate to the circulatory system. There are a few in here over the urinary system and microbiology. So I'll just point those out to you so you know you don't have to worry about them. But most of them in here are for the circulatory system. So nephron, that's part of the kidney, so you don't have to worry about that one. Urinalysis, you don't have to worry about that one, and zone of inhibition, that has to do with microbiology. So those are three terms you don't have to worry about, but the rest are all about the circulatory system. Then we have the circulation of the blood through the heart and the pieces of the heart. So we will be labeling these. It's helpful to have a red and blue either pen or colored pencil as we work through this, so you can write the arteries and the veins, arteries in red and the veins in blue, and that kind of helps you understand the blood flow through the heart. Then we have the major veins here that we'll be talking about. And then the next page is the major arteries. We'll go through those as well. And then anything that we have for you, anything I'm going to say is written for you here in the circulatory system function and notes and stuff like that. So we try to give you guys things in several different ways. Verbally, with a lecture, we incorporate color, and then we want to have things written out for you as well. We have you guys write some stuff, so we try to hit all those learning styles for you guys. So we'll also talk about the structure of the blood and some blood cells, because we're talking about the circulatory system. We'll go through some of the red blood cells and white blood cells, talk a little bit about immunity. So, all right, so those are the notes. So why don't we get started? We're going to click on the Heart and Vessels PowerPoint to go over this lecture. So here is the lecture. We're going to go ahead and begin. So the circulatory system, its function, it works hand in hand with the respiratory system. So we just got done with the respiratory system. So the circulatory system and the respiratory system work hand in hand. So the respiratory system is going to bring that oxygen, or O2, into the body. And then the circulatory system is going to pick that up, and it's going to move the oxygen throughout the body to the organs and tissues and cells that need it. So the respiratory system brings in that O2 or oxygen into the body, and it goes down through the trachea, through the bronchi, into the bronchial trees, to those alveoli sacs, the grape-like sacs at the end of the respiratory system, and the grape-like sacs are covered with capillaries. So capillaries are very thin walls of the circulatory system, and oxygen goes in and carbon dioxide goes out. And that happens through diffusion. So oxygen diffuses into the bloodstream, and then CO2 diffuses out into the respiratory system so that it can be exhaled out of the body and getting rid of that CO2 or carbon dioxide waste. So the oxygen is now in the bloodstream. The bloodstream is like a highway, and it delivers it to all the organs, vessels, and tissues around the body. So excretory, it removes waste from the body, so it's removing that carbon dioxide or CO2 waste from the body. It's also involved in protection, so clotting. So if you have a laceration, there are thrombocytes. Those are also those are platelets. Thrombocytes are platelets, so they go to the site of the laceration along with a protein called fibrinogen. It makes a matrix up, so kind of like a webbing of protein and platelets webbed together in this matrix, not like the Keanu Reeves matrix, but a matrix that comes together to form a clot to stop the bleeding. The bloodstream also transports white blood cells to the site of an infection. So say an animal has an infected nail or something like that. It would send white blood cells to that infected area. So the white blood cells, through phagocytosis, eating it, would eat away at the bacteria there to help heal that wound on that nail or claw. Nutrition, the circulatory system delivers energy and food throughout the body. Regulatory system, it helps to prevent pH and temperature. And then hormones. It helps to transport those hormones to the organs needed when they need it. So those are the functions of the circulatory systems. You will need to know that for the test. All right, so here is the circulation through the heart. I like this diagram. I think it's helpful. It has the veins in blue to denote the deoxygenated blood and the blood flow through the heart. And then it has the arteries, or most of them, in red to denote the oxygenated blood and the oxygenated blood flow through the heart. The only problem I have is that it's just backwards to me. So let's go ahead. Luckily, I have a student who helped me out and figured out how to flip this. So you are the heart. So the right side is on the right side and the left side is on the left side. So when you're looking at it, you're like right side here, left side here. All right, so you'll see the cranial vena cava here, and then the caudal vena cava here. So the cranial vena cava is also called the superior vena cava, and that is typically what I refer to it as, cranial vena cava and superior vena cava, same thing. Two different words, same thing. Caudal vena cava and inferior vena cava, two different words, but it's the same thing. So the cranial vena cava brings deoxygenated blood from the head and the cranial portion of the animal, whereas the caudal vena cava, or the inferior one, brings the deoxygenated blood from the caudal portion of the body up to the right atrium. So that deoxygenated blood is coming into the right atrium, that top chamber of the heart, the right atrium. So then it goes through the right atrium, lub-dub, it goes through the tricuspid valve here, 3 tricuspid valve. You may want to circle that and put a little sign over here that says tricuspid, tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. So it's March Madness. I think of basketball. And so to remember tricuspid valve and bicuspid valve, I think that I'm number 32. So 32, I'm wearing number 32. It's March Madness. We're playing basketball. And you can remember tricuspid valve on the right side, bicuspid valve on the left side. The bicuspid valve is also called the mitral valve. Gotta love anatomy and physiology. There's more than one name or word for, the same thing. So gotta love it, but that's the part of anatomy and physiology. So deoxygenated blood comes in from the body to the right atrium, goes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. From there, it gets a push out of the pulmonary arteries and into the lungs. So the lungs are out here on each side of the heart here. You have the lungs, and the pulmonary arteries carry the blood out to the lungs, and they go down to those capillaries that surround the alveoli sacs of the lungs, and oxygen diffuses in and carbon dioxide diffuses out, and now the blood is oxygenated. So this oxygenated blood then comes back in from the lungs and comes back into the left atrium, and they come in through the pulmonary veins. So pulmon means lung, pulmonary, pulmon, that's from your terminology, means lung. So pulmonary arteries take deoxygenated blood out to the lungs, and then the pulmonary veins bring the oxygenated blood back into the heart in the left atrium, that upper chamber there. It goes through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Now the left ventricle, it is the muscle builder of the heart. The left ventricle gives a huge push, lub-dub, huge push, and it pushes the blood out the aorta, and then it goes out to oxygenate the rest of the body. So some part of the aorta goes cranially and up to the head to oxygenate the brain. That's very important for your brain to have oxygen. And then other parts of the aorta curve around, and the blood heads caudally to oxygenate the rest of the body. So there is one thing that we'll talk about with the pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary vein. They just don't play by all the rules. They abide by part of the rule, but not all of the rules. So let's talk about the arteries and veins, and then we'll bounce back here to the heart, and we'll talk about how the pulmonary vein and the pulmonary arteries kind of break the rules. So let's move on to the veins. Here are the veins of the dog. Okay. So we have the cranial vena cava and the caudal vena cava, also called superior and inferior vena cava, bringing deoxygenated blood to the heart. Those are the major highways. It'd be like Route 75 here, State Route 75. So all these other veins are like highways coming to that main corridor, the vena cava, via superior or inferior. All right, so we have the jugular vein. We'll start up top here towards the head. The jugular veins are the major veins in the neck of the animal. And we use the jugular vein in horses to draw blood. That is our go-to vein to draw blood in horses, is the jugular vein. This is going to be on the test, so you might want to jot it down on your notes. To remember that the jugular vein is the go-to vein to draw blood in horses. It also is the vein that we put medication into that needs to go IV, intravenously IV in the vein. And we typically use the jugular vein. It's a nice vein. It's right in the neck. It's easy for us to stand on the side of the horse and get to that vein and keep ourselves safe. So that is why we use the jugular vein, not only to draw blood, but to put medication into the vein. All right, then we have the cephalic vein. The cephalic vein runs down the front legs of dogs and cats. So right down the front legs of dogs and cats, and that is our go-to vein to draw blood in dogs and cats, is the cephalic vein. I would jot that down too, because that is going to be on the test. So dogs and cats, our go-to vein to draw blood is going to be the cephalic vein. If we need more than just like a regular amount to do a test, then our second option is to go to the jugular vein. It's a bigger vein. We can get a little bit more blood out of that one. So cephalic vein is our first one we go to. The jugular vein then is the second option. All right, as the veins break off and travel down the leg, we have the auxiliary vein, and then we have the brachial vein. So it's kind of like follow the yellow brick road when we're looking at these veins, when we're dissecting and stuff. So as it breaks off and it moves further down a leg or a body part, the veins start to change names. The veins and the arteries start to change names as they branch off. So we have auxiliary first, and then brachial as it moves further down. All right, let's go down here. We have, if you have an ovary, you have an ovarian vein. If you have a kidney, you have, which I hope you do, we have renal veins. So rain, kids on their knees, kidney, renal vein. That comes from your guys' terminology. You should start to pick up on that stuff. If you have a testicle, here's the testicular vein. Here in the groin area of the animal is the external iliac vein, and then here we have the femoral vein. So as it branches off, external iliac up here, as it branches off the inferior vena cava or the caudal vena cava, it's the external iliac. As it goes down further and it passes across where the femur is, then you get the femoral vein. So keep in mind, if you know where the femur is, we learned that first. It's through between the pelvis and the stifle area. And then we learned about the muscular system, and biceps femoris runs across where the femur is. Now we're in the circulatory system, and we have the femoral vein, and that runs across where the femur is. So anatomy really kind of follows suit sometimes, and you can learn things. If you know one structure, you can know another. As it branches off further in the femoral vein, it becomes the saphenous. Now, this is an option as well, drawing blood back here in smaller animals, cats, dogs, sometimes another source for us to draw blood. But typically, cephalic is our first choice. Jugular vein, if we need a little bit more blood, here is another choice if we need to. Then we have the caudal vein. So the caudal vein is our go-to for rats and mice, if we need to get some blood, and cows. So if you have a cow and you need to get some blood off of, you take that tail and you lift it straight up, and then you can stick the needle right straight into that caudal vein and draw back and get the blood you need for tests in cows. So caudal vein, cows. Jugular vein for horses is what we draw from. Typically with small animals, we start with the cephalic vein to get our blood. All right, let's talk just a little bit more about veins. So veins carry deoxygenated blood, and deoxygenated blood, veins carry it to the heart or towards the heart. So it's carrying deoxygenated blood, it's carrying it towards the heart. It is also a low pressure system. So if you remember the digestive system, and when we talked about horses and cattle, how they have to consume a lot of roughage and they're constant grazers, so their head is down a lot on the ground because they're eating. constantly to consume all that roughage and stuff for their digestive system. So if we were to do that and stand on our head, for long periods of time, I mean, our head would just kind of start to fill up and our ears might start ringing because we have all this blood that's kind of hanging out at the head. So what they have is they have little valves in their jugular veins to keep the blood from flowing backwards. So they can have their head down quite a bit while they eat and consume, all the food they need to eat. As the blood pumps, it gets, it doesn't go backwards. So they have these little valves. The blood keeps moving, and the valve stops it. So every time the heart pumps, the blood moves a little bit further. So that's how they can keep their head down and eat for long periods of time and not have like this blood pooling in their head. So jugular or veins also have thin walls. So it's a low pressure system. They have thin walls. Their blood color is a darker, kind of almost burgundy type blood because it is deoxygenated. And veins are more superficial, so more towards the surface of the animal's body. So low pressure system, they take deoxygenated blood to the heart. They have thin walls. They have some valves in there to keep the blood from pooling, and they are more superficial in the body. All right, let's move on to arteries then. Here we go. Okay, so we have, we'll start with the facial arteries. So way back at the beginning of school, we did physical exams on our horses here, and we felt for the pulse, and we were feeling for the pulse under the mandible of the horse. And I told you to feel for it. Felt like kind of like a Twizzler. If you push up against the mandible, you were feeling for a Twizzler type thing, and you could feel the pulse go across your fingers. Well, what you were feeling for was the facial artery, and that is where you were taking the pulse from. The facial artery. So here is the heart, and you have the major artery that is pumping oxygenated blood off and heading cranially. It comes off here, and then it breaks off into the common carotid arteries. So the common carotid arteries come up, and it's feeding oxygen to the brain. So those common carotid arteries coming straight off the aorta and giving oxygen to the brain. Very important. Also coming off the heart, we have the aorta, and then it branches off into the brachiocephalic artery, and then again follow the yellow brick road type thing as it branches off. Then it turns into the axillary artery, and then as it goes further down the arm, it turns into the brachial artery. All right, let's cruise down here. So we'll go caudally, and we have the mesenteric artery. The mesenteric artery feeds the internal organs of the abdomen and the intestines. So we want to make sure they have plenty of oxygenated blood and nutrients to keep them going. Again, if you have an ovary, you'll have an ovarian artery. If you have a testicle, you'll have a testicular artery. And then we all have kidneys, hopefully. Renal artery then takes oxygenated blood to the kidneys. And then as you go down here to the hind legs, you have the external iliac artery is in the groin area. And then again, as that artery passes over where the femur is, you have the femoral artery. And then in the tail, we have the caudal artery. So let's go up here and check out this guy right here. And this kind of leads us back to the difference between arteries and veins and those pulmonary arteries that don't always follow the rules. So this pulmonary artery is written in blue. And that's because pulmonary arteries, they do follow one rule. They do carry blood away from the heart. They're carrying that deoxygenated blood away from the heart and carrying it to the lungs. So artery away, they are following that rule to carry the blood away from the heart, but they're carrying deoxygenated blood. So typically arteries, every other one but the pulmonary, carry oxygenated blood. So the pulmonary artery does break kind of that rule. So arteries, let's talk about them. Artery A, artery away, artery away. So they carry oxygenated blood away from the heart. The arteries are under high pressure. It's a lot of pressure to get all that oxygen and nutrients out to the body. They are under a high pressure system. So the walls of the arteries are thicker. They have a thicker arterial wall because they are in a high pressure system. Arterial blood is bright red because it has all this oxygen that are clinging to the red blood cells and attached to the hemoglobin on those red blood cells, and that makes the blood a bright red. So the arteries carry oxygenated blood away from the heart. It's in a high pressure system. The walls are thicker and they are deeper. So whoever put us together, however you believe, did a good job because the arteries are closer to the core of the body. They are deeper. They're not superficial like the veins are. Arteries have to be protected. If you lacerate a vein, you need to seek help. If you lacerate an artery, you really need to get the animal somewhere quickly to stop that bleeding, because you will bleed out very quickly if you lacerate an artery. So I think that's why they're closer to the core of the body, just to protect them more, because if you lacerate an artery, it does spurt. It spurts blood every time the heart beats. It's spurting out that bright red blood, and you can lose a lot of blood very quickly if an artery were to get lacerated. So, all right, let's buzz back to the picture of that heart and just talk about those pulmonary arteries and veins. So here we have it. The pulmonary arteries do carry blood away from the heart. It does follow that rule, but it does carry deoxygenated blood. It's breaking the rules. So that's the pulmonary arteries. And then here, the pulmonary veins, the vein part does carry blood back to the heart, and that's part of the veins, but it carries oxygenated blood, and all the other veins carry deoxygenated blood. So those pulmonaries, they just like breaking the rules. All right, so let's move on. We've talked about the blood flow through the heart. We talked about the veins and the differences there. We've talked about the arteries, the common ones, and the differences there. Let's talk a little bit about the structure of the blood. So blood is composed of 40% cells and 60% plasma. And the plasma is the water portion, the liquid portion of the blood. The cells that are in the blood, we have erythrocytes. Those are red blood cells. Erythro means red. He was throwing the red. Going back to your terminology, those terminology lessons, they're a little hard to get through, but they're extremely important, and they go hand in hand with anatomy and physiology. Leukocytes, leuc meaning white, cyte meaning cell. So leukocytes are white blood cells. I remember this because of Star Wars. Luke, I am your father. So Luke wore white in the beginning of the Star Wars movies. So that's kind of, helps me to remember leukocytes. And then we have platelets. Platelets are also called thrombocytes. So trombone, there was a trombone and there was a clot in it. Trombone. And those are platelets, and they help with the clotting and the matrix with the fibrinogen. All right, so here are our erythrocytes, or red blood cells. They are the most abundant blood cell in the blood. The function is to transport oxygen throughout the body. Over here we have the mammal cell. Here is the red blood cells of mammals. So dogs, cats, horses, you, me, all have red blood cells like these here. And these little guys next to the red blood cells, those are platelets. So you can see the size difference between red blood cells and then platelets. So these are the red blood cells. A couple of these guys look like they have holes in the middle. They really don't. It's not a donut. It's more like a peanut from the side, if that helps. It's thicker around the edges and then kind of thinner in the middle. So sometimes it doesn't take up the dye in the middle, so they do look like donuts, but they're not. There's not. There is material throughout. It's just thicker on the outside and kind of thinner in the middle. All right, let's look at bird and reptile cells. So here are the red blood cells of birds and reptiles, and they have a nucleus in them. So they have a cell nucleus in these red blood cells. And then if you notice these guys, these are two different cells. Those are white blood cells. They actually look like some lymphocytes, so a type of white blood cell. So these are reptiles, and birds here have this type of red blood cells, and then mammals over here have this type of red blood cell. Next we have, we're getting into the white blood cells. So there's a couple different kinds of white blood cells. And we're going to just go over this just so you have an idea, and we dive deeper into this your senior year and the hematology unit when you guys are actually working with the blood and smearing it and staining it and looking at it under the microscope. So here's the neutrophil. The function is to stop or slow down foreign organisms. They work by phagocytosis, so that's eating the bacteria and killing that bacteria. It's bactericidal. So how neutrophils and white blood cells work, they track down the bacteria, they surround it, they break down the outer shell of the bacteria, and they eat it through phagocytosis. So phage means to eat, cyte, eating cells. So phagocytosis, and those are neutrophils. The next one we have is basophils. So here is a basophil cell, and then here are some red blood cells around there, so you can kind of see the size difference. So basophils help with allergic reactions. So it's getting to be springtime here in Ohio. So as those allergens start to circulate in the air, both humans and animals can get allergies, and so we rely on our basophils get released in the bloodstream to kind of help with those allergens that are trying to affect the animals and the humans. So they help us out quite a bit. So you will see if your animal is particularly allergic to something, you'll see more basophils in the bloodstream. Eosinophils, I happen to think eosinophils are the prettiest of all white blood cells. They have these little raspberries in the cytoplasm here, raspberry looking things. So eosinophils help with an inflammatory response. So if your animal is running and turns really quick and injures like their stifle area or something like that around the patella, and there's inflammation, eosinophils are sent out to help with that inflammation. So if you have an animal that is having an inflammatory response to an injury, you're going to see a lot more eosinophils in the bloodstream. Next, we have lymphocytes and monocytes, some of my favorite white blood cells. So the lymphocytes play a vital role in immunity, and that has been a huge talk with the whole coronavirus and stuff. T cells are our memory cells, and they are there to remember that antigen so that they can fight it off the next time. So vaccines, we're getting vaccinated now. Vaccines give a portion or a distorted part of the virus or the bacteria. Usually it's virus. And so the animal may feel a little lethargic after getting a vaccine, and may even run a little bit of a fever, and they may have a slight reaction to it. That's just the body figuring out how to attack this foreign entity that is trying to make the body sick. And so the T cells are like, okay, all right, I see you, and they're like figuring out how to fight them off. So the next time if you come in contact with that, they're like, okay, I remember you. I know how to fight you off, and and they can kind of go at it. So the B cells are also there. They're kind of, I call them the backup singers, or the second line of defense. So the T cells, they're like, okay, all right, I got you. But if anybody tries to sneak through, you got your B cells there that are dividing and getting up there to continue the fight and make sure nobody breaks through, and they get all that virus and that bacteria and they can fight it off. So lymphocytes, extremely important when we're talking about immunity and protecting from diseases, and why we vaccinate and how we vaccinate and how it works. And then we have monocytes. Monocytes are the largest of the white blood cells. They do work through phagocytosis. So we have a video of them in the bloodstream, and they're moving around and they're chasing a bacteria, and they encompass the bacteria and they destroy it through phagocytosis by eating it. So they break down that outer cell wall and destroy that bacteria. So it's rather cool. I kind of like watching that stuff and learning about it. So thrombocytes, we're saving the best for last. So thrombocytes, hemostasis is clotting, so stopping the bleeding by adhering to damaged vessels and clumping together, forming that matrix with the protein fibrinogen that helps to form that clot so you can stop the bleeding. So these little guys, they are small, but they are mighty. So these are the big red blood cells here, but these little guys here are the platelets, also called thrombocytes. So never just one word for something. You got to remember both. Got to love anatomy and physiology. These little guys are platelets, also called thrombocytes. All right, so that is it for our lecture. I do want to go over that compare and contrast matrix and talk about the arteries and veins to make sure that we have that down. So let's scroll up to the top here. All right, so arteries and veins, type of blood carried. So arteries carry oxygenated blood, so you would write oxygenated right here, and then veins carry deoxygenated blood. And then direction the blood is carried, arteries away, so oxygenated blood is carried away from the heart. Oxygenated blood is carried away, arteries carry oxygenated blood away. Then we have the veins. Well, veins carry deoxygenated blood to the heart or towards the heart. To the heart. Veins carry deoxygenated blood to the heart. Pressure system. So arteries, they're under a lot of pressure to get that oxygen and nutrients out to the body. So it's a high pressure system in the arteries. That's why they have those thicker walls, because they have that high pressure. And then the veins are under a low pressure. That's why they have those valves in some of the veins to keep the blood from going backwards, keeps it moving towards the heart every heartbeat. So low pressure system here in the veins, and they have those the valves there. All right, now we have color. So color is divided into two parts because we want to talk about when we're dissecting, and then we want to talk about the actual color of blood. So when we're dissecting, arteries are going to be dyed red for you to kind of follow the yellow brick road like we're in Oz and figure out, you know, where the arteries going. So arteries are dyed red, veins are going to be dyed blue, and then for color, arteries carry oxygenated blood, which is bright red. If you have an arterial leak, if you happen to be giving a medication or trying to draw blood and you go too deep and you get to an artery, that blood is bright red. Looks way different than venous blood. So bright red blood for arteries, and then a darker kind of burgundy type blood for the deoxygenated blood from the veins. All right, so that is our compare and contrast matrix. That's our lecture and one of our videos. As always, if you guys have any questions, we are here for you. So don't be afraid to ask. All right, thanks guys. Bye.